Marathons and Ironman races are much more dangerous than they tell you. People go missing and die every year in these races, and they think it's just an accident. It's no accident. There's something going on at these races. But I'll be quick. If you're ready to suspend your disbelief and get fully immersed in today's adventure, you found your new favorite channel. We post once a week, but there's plenty on the channel to binge. So if you're ready, like the video for good luck because you're gonna need it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our uploads. Enjoy the show. So my friend Jimmy and I went to Colorado to compete in a triathlon. I'm not really into endurance sports, and neither is Jimmy, but he's a madman and he can be very convincing when he wants to be. It wasn't an Ironman race, it wasn't nearly that long. It was a little bit shorter than a half Ironman. To be candid, I don't even know what it's called, so feel free to enlighten me in the comments. But it didn't seem that hard, so we were confident we could do it. The only portion that we weren't sure was the swimming, so we did a couple pool workouts, and that boosted our confidence enough to think that we could take on this task. We were both in reasonably good shape and in our early 20s, so we both just thought that delusion and adrenaline would probably carry us through. And this race was taking place in the most stunningly beautiful area of Colorado, a little northwest of Boulder. And to give you a little breakdown on the race, the swimming portion was just at this really amazing lake that you would swim to a buoy, swim around it, and then swim back, and that was the entire swimming portion. Then there would be a tent where you change into your biking gear and you take this amazing trail up and over a mountain. So the first half of the cycling portion would be mostly an incline, and then once you get over the edge, the second half would be a nice smooth cruise through a decline. It was a stunning winding road that took you over this mountain, and at some points it actually got a little bit scary because there was only a railing between you and like a 500-foot drop off. And then after that is a run through a very heavily wooded area where there's dense foliage to your left and then a steep mountainside to your right. And like I said, we were a little delusional, but once we got there, the confidence rose because the sheer beauty of this place could carry us to the end of this race, not to mention right around 1,000 people that were there just as excited as we were. The energy at this place was absolutely amazing, and we got there a little bit early, we set up our base camp, and we had the chance to talk to a bunch of other racers. And we were particularly looking for people that were a little bit more experienced than us so we could ask for some advice before we started. And we found this amazing group of guys that were so generous with information, specifically this one guy named Ted that basically said he would walk us through this entire race and was just there for a good time and was willing to guide us through the intricacies of a race like this. The energy here was great, but the best part of it was having an informed individual breaking down the intricacies of why endurance sports are so cool. To me, there's nothing better than hearing somebody who's passionate about a subject explain the intricacies of it because it almost teaches you how to fall in love with that subject as well. I've always had this philosophy that everything is cool in this world if you learn enough about it. And Ted told us that the coolest part about today's event was that the top 10 Ironmen were all competing today. He said that they use these races as like warm-up events, so they peak for the big races at a certain time of the year, but it's good to compete regularly even if it's against random amateurs. It's very similar to the strategy that boxers use. They fight 3 cans in a row leading up to a big fight against another top contender, just so they get in the rhythm of competing so they could peak on the day that they fight the other best guy in the world. So we had a little bit of time before the race started, and Ted is telling me about his favorite racer. It was this guy named Marcus Cravens, and apparently he was the Tom Brady of endurance sports. Just the LeBron James of swimming, biking, running in that order. Apparently this guy hadn't lost a race in 5 years, and there's no drug testing in these sports, so this guy's just jacked and decked out in all of his own custom gear, looking like an absolute cyborg. Apparently this guy customized his race equipment to be the most efficient that he possibly could, so he made a chest vest with a pouch on the front and back, where the one on the back had electrolyte water and the one on the front had those easy carb gels, and there was a tube running from each pouch down his arm, and the tubes run to a mouthpiece at the end that he could eat or drink from. And the tube is attached to metal loops that wrap around each finger to effortlessly keep it in place. So right hand, fresh spring water with electrolytes, and left hand, carb gel. The dude carries enough fuel to run an ultra marathon without stopping. And I could tell that Ted could have talked about this guy all day, and I would have listened because it was fascinating, but the race was about to start soon. So we just suited up in our swim stuff and made our way to the edge of the lake to start the race. And this race started with a mass start. A mass start is different from a rolling start. A rolling start, it paces out the time in which people start the race, which is much safer and becoming much more common these days so people don't pile on top of each other in the water. But this race started with a mass start. which basically means, oh, all 1,000 of you are ready to start swimming? Start. And it just becomes this massive train wreck with people piling on top of each other trying to swim. And let me tell you how different this was from our very casual lap training in the pool, because at one point I almost started panicking, because when you turn your head to catch a breath, usually you know where the water ends, but here everybody's splashing around, so you'll miss a breath because somebody kicks water into your mouth, and when you're not an experienced swimmer, one breath could mean the world. Or you'll just get kicked in the top of the head from somebody that's in front of you, or you just get wrestled out of the way and sometimes even swam straight over and just plunged under the water. But the adrenaline is pumping once you get in there, so if you embrace the intensity of that moment, it actually becomes very fun. So we get to that buoy and we loop around it after what felt like an absolute eternity and start heading back towards shore. The way back felt way easier because everybody spread out a little bit. The pros were way ahead, and then there was the group of very good amateurs, and then us, very average athletes that were there for a good time. So we finally get to shore, and it was so much more exhausting than I was expecting, but we start aggressively changing to start the cycling portion of this race. But I noticed there's a little underlying commotion at this event where the workers are talking to first responders, and clearly something went wrong, but it didn't seem to be a major issue that the race was stopping. So we kind of just had to ignore it and just keep going. So we just hopped on the bike because we had to keep going, and we chalked up the commotion to somebody probably being stuck at the buoy and somebody just needed some help. The cycling was by far the hardest part of this race because of the incline to start, and the quads were absolutely burning on the way up. But once you hit the peak and you got that decline on the way down, it became very scenic and very calm. And I mean calm because you didn't really have to pedal or exert yourself. You could just roll with the inertia. But there was one thing that was a little concerning. There were some turns on the way down that were a bit questionable. There wasn't nearly enough signage before a hard left turn, and the only thing between you and a 500-foot drop was a small guardrail, and the only thing that guardrail would be good for would be hitting your front tire and sending you over the front handlebars into the abyss. This thing wasn't protecting anybody. If your brakes went out leading up to one of these turns, it could send you over the edge for sure. But we lucked out and we finished the cycling unscathed, and we get to the jogging portion. We do the quick change as you do, and we all planned to jog this last stretch at an absolute snail's pace. But again, at the tents where we're changing to start this run, there's this underlying sense of a commotion with all of the event workers. They all seem to be flustered and concerned, and they all seem to be having very serious conversations with police, but nobody's talking to us or bringing the commotion to the racers, so we just figure, let's keep it moving. But something just felt a little bit off to me, so I double check with Jimmy, and I just ask him, does something feel off to you here? What do you think's going on? And he just casually replies, people get heat stroke at these things all the time. They're probably dropping like flies out here. Just laughing. Jimmy works for the fire department, so he's seen it all. Plus, he has a really good gauge of how first responders are feeling, considering he is one. So if he isn't worried, then I wasn't worried. But on the other hand, he's really callous to things like this because of everything that he's seen. So he keeps it positive regardless of what's going on. There could be chaos happening, and he's just like, thumbs up, I'm happy. So who really knows? So we start the run, and at this point, our group had fallen back in the rankings of this race quite a bit. So way far ahead, it's the pros, then it's the pretty good endurance athletes, and then it's the mediocre athletes that played sports in high school that had delusional confidence that they could do a triathlon on zero training. We were absolutely cooked at this point, but we were going to finish this race regardless, even if it meant walking up every incline. So we're basically run walking, maybe 2 miles an hour, and we finally get to this turn in the trail where in the distance we see a group of racers all stopped and circled around something off the right side of the trail. At this point in the trail, we were right up against a very steep mountainside to the right. There was only about 10 feet in between the trail and this steep mountain. If you stepped off the trail to the right, there was a little dip and a slight decline until it hit the mountainside and became a massive incline. So you had the trail and it was almost like a dip into a mountain. And then to the left was just miles and miles of dense woods. And when we jog up to this massive group of people circling something to the right of this ditch on the side of the trail, everybody's faces were filled with concern, and it seemed as if nobody wanted to tell us what happened and why we were all congregated here. The group just had this overwhelming sense of sadness, and they just stepped out of the way so the newcomers that were reaching the group could see what everybody was sad about. So we wiggle our way through this group, and we finally get to the front, and we see what everybody's sad about. There's a man about 5 feet off trail, face down in this ditch, and the back of his head is busted open bad. And there was just a rock covered in blood a couple feet away from his body, and a bunch of other similar sized rocks scattered all around his body. From the looks of it, it seemed as if he might have stepped off trail to use the bathroom, and some type of rock slide happened where these rocks fell from this this mountainside and struck him. We started asking around if anybody had turned him over and checked on him or identified him, and some of the people around let us know that they had checked his pulse, and it was very clear that he had passed away for quite a while at this point. And they actually didn't need to turn him over to identify him. They could tell who it was from the back because they were all a fan of him. It was one of the pro athletes that were there. Everybody else knew exactly who it was just by what he was wearing. His name was George Davidson. He was one of the top 3 guys in the world, and he was so far ahead of most people that he probably got hit by this rock over an hour earlier, and nobody had gotten to him to save him in time. And some people didn't even notice him at first because of the divot, this ditch on the side of the trail. He was in a spot that you would have to step off trail to see him, and they only found him because somebody did just that. A bunch of people probably ran right past him. This put a horrible damper on the mood. This was a tragedy and everybody was broken up about it. Even us that didn't know who this guy was. We weren't even fans of endurance athletes. It was just the fact that we were all here to have fun and we're witnessing an absolute tragedy and an undeserving loss of a life. So we all waited there for the first responders to come to retrieve the body before we all finished the race together. None of us really cared at that point to finish the race. Some people tried to create the narrative that he would want us to finish to motivate everybody to finish the race, but personally, I just thought he probably would have just liked it to not get randomly killed today in a freak accident. And this doesn't have to become a motivational Instagram quote. We could just be sad about it. So we eventually get to the finish line, but the energy of the event is just not the same and everybody is destroyed by what happened. But naturally, there's police there that need to question everybody that was in the area, just to see if anybody saw anything, just to get a couple different perspectives on what could have possibly happened so they could fill out a police report properly. We figured that the police probably came to the same conclusion as us because of the way the scene looked. It looked like it was a rock slide and he got randomly hit, but the way that the police officer was asking us questions didn't align with our assumptions. Something was up here. The officer that we were interacting with was asking us questions that implied that he thought that there was foul play. We expected to have a conversation that went like this. We arrived way later than most people, so we only know what we were told. But this officer wasn't asking questions about the run. He was asking questions about the swim and the bike ride and was asking if we noticed anybody acting suspicious or aggressively. Our group was absolutely great. We didn't notice any bad energy whatsoever the entire day leading up to finding George's body. That's excluding the weird energy we were getting from the workers interacting with the first responders. That was the only thing weird about the event. The people seemed absolutely positive. Nobody seemed mean or aggressive. There was just a weird aura around the workers and the responders. So something clicks in my head, and it must have clicked in Jimmy's head too, because Jimmy asked the cop, "Hey man, what's really going on here?" And the cop initially brushes off Jimmy's question and just steamrolls into his next question. Jimmy cuts him off and lets him know that he's in the fire department also. So naturally the officer lowers his guard a little bit because Jimmy's one of the guys. And all first responders have a connection like that. They aren't really civilians, neither of them. So they don't treat each other like civilians. They treat each other like what they are, first responders. There's a level of understanding and respect that they have for each other that allows them to open up a little bit more. And with the officer's guard down a little bit, he lets us know that George's body wasn't the only body found that day. He lets us know that they found somebody drowned by the buoy, and they found somebody at the bottom of a 300-foot drop right at one of those sharp turns off the bike trail. Somebody had died at each event today, and that was the underlying commotion at all of the events. So now with that additional context, the officer asks us to reevaluate the day and think hard if we noticed any suspicious activities. But we really didn't. The day was very fun and positive. We didn't notice anybody acting out of character. We asked him what he thought about it, and he let us know that something felt off to him about this situation, but nobody seemed to notice anything, and the other officers are kind of brushing it off and are not nearly as interested in it as him. He said that there was no real signs of foul play, but one body in each event seemed awfully convenient for it to be a coincidence. And once the questioning was over, we actually ended up talking to this officer for over an hour just about everything. He was a good guy, and we were in town for 2 weeks, so we could use some recommendations on what we should do outside of this event and horrible tragedy. And he actually offered to meet us in Boulder the very next day to show us some of his favorite spots, and we took him up on it. And to be completely candid with you, I was excited to hang out with him because he was a good guy, but I was also excited to pry a little bit further about any information that he had from the day prior after he was a couple brewskis deep. I just wanted to ask him some similar questions, worded a little bit differently, while he was a little bit more loose-lipped, and Jimmy agreed. He wanted some more information from an insider, and it was all me and Jimmy could talk about the entire night before meeting up with this guy the next day. Just the thought of it, 3 deaths happening during one race, at the only race we've ever competed in. We just felt overwhelmingly lucky that it wasn't us. The person drowning kind of made sense to us, because that swimming portion felt dangerous. It felt like absolute mayhem, and you could get kicked in the temple and go unconscious at any point. And the bike made a little bit of sense because those turns were sharp and those guardrails were hazardous. But also, to be fair again, you could see those from a mile away. The rock slide on the trail though, that one stood out. That is 1 in a million bad luck. And it really makes you think, especially with the other 2 bodies prior, did somebody hit him with that rock? So right when we get back to the hotel room, we just start Googling, are triathlon deaths common? Yes, they're kind of common, but we weren't satisfied with just that because all it says is, like what Jimmy said, heat stroke, cardiac arrest, that's it. So I decided to hit up that guy Ted from the race, that really friendly guy that was a massive fan of these style of races, and I asked him to send me the information on those top 10 pro athletes that he said were there that day. Because Jimmy made a really good point. He said that if somebody did hit George with a rock, it would have had to be one of the pros, because they said that they didn't find George for at least an hour, so they would have had to been so far ahead of the second wave of competitors that it must have been one of the pros. And Ted got back to us pretty quickly with a link to the rankings and other resources where we could look deeper into these athletes' profiles. I think that he thought we were getting more into the sport, and he was excited to share with us all the resources that he uses to track this sport more efficiently. It was super helpful. These websites were fantastic, but he was oblivious to the fact that we were playing detective and trying to solve a murder. But his resources were incredible, and we had the full list of competitors that were there that day. We also had a list of all the races that all the competitors competed in, and it became pretty clear that this core of competitors competed in very similar races and had very similar schedules and peaked at very similar times. So we decided to create a spreadsheet cross-referencing each athlete, which events they've competed in, if a death occurred during that event, and if there was a witness to the death. It seems tedious, but it was only about an hour and a half of copying and pasting data and cross-referencing to local crimes. So we started from about 5 years earlier leading up to present day, and we noticed a couple things. 1, people do die at these events, but it's almost always in the swimming portion or of heat stroke, and someone almost always witnesses it. 2, these top 10 athletes competed against each other dozens of times, and they have almost identical racing schedules. And it seems as if they're all on the same page and they almost always race in this exact group. And 3, one of these top 10 athletes is a serial killer, and this individual strikes at the events that they all decide to race in, and he started a little over a year earlier. And 4, whichever one of them is doing it is getting more and more violent race by race. Guys, very quick, I just wanted to let you know that I came out with a little bit of merchandise. We get tons of views on every single week. We get over 100,000 views, and I don't really know if that's going to translate into people buying merchandise. I don't really care if it does, but we've seen some comments where some people were asking for ways to support the channel, and a lot of people were asking for cool graphic tees with shirts that represent the stories, so we came out with this one. This is just a really nice black t-shirt from a really good distributor, really soft, nice garment. We don't cut any corners, and the graphic embodies the Skinwalker Ranch story. I hope you guys like it. We're really optimistic that the support is there, but it's okay if it isn't. At the end of the day, we just really hope that you like these stories and these videos, and we're going to continue delivering those. So if you want a piece of merch, go to DougieCorrado.com and grab one from the pre-sale. We're only going to sell these for about 2 weeks, and we're never going to sell these again. So if you want these, go ahead and grab them at DougieCorrado.com. If you don't, just enjoy the rest of the show. It is crazy how when you organize data, you could see clear as day what picture it's painting. It was clear that when you organized the data of the races that these 10 athletes competed in and compared it to all of the races that they haven't, there are random, sporadic, explainable deaths when they don't all attend. But when they do all attend, there's a clear pattern that's been gaining velocity for a year. And it hit a crescendo at this event where the killer took out 3 people in one day. But this time, the only difference was that they took out one of their own. And I'm not going to go through every name of each athlete. I don't want to bore you with a bunch of irrelevant character descriptions. All of these people are a little crazy. They're Ironmen and ultra marathon runners. These are just a different breed of people. Each and every one of them have crazy person eyes and an Instagram that's so intense with motivational content that makes you feel lazy for blinking. It wasn't our intention to look through each one of the individuals and their background. We were looking at the data, and the data pointed to one man and one man only, and his name was Jeff Wilnick. Jeff was a former accountant that had found Ironman racing later in his life. He did his first race, it changed his life, he quit his job, and he just went all in from there. To be honest, this guy's story is amazing and super inspiring, but along the way of his journey, something must have went wrong because he clearly started killing. And I say that because the only race where there was no murder was the only race that all 10 of them didn't compete. And guess who sat out that race? Jeff Wilnick sat out that one race with shin splints last minute. And it was clear as day that nobody died that day because he wasn't out there to kill them. And then when we looked a little bit deeper into that particular race, it turns out that Marcus Cravens and George Davidson had an electrifying photo finish that day, with George nearly dethroning Marcus, but Marcus prevailing right at the last second. It was horrible seeing those photos of George and Marcus celebrating together after that day of hard competition. You could tell those two men live for those kind of moments. Those two men were the best in the world, and Jeff Wilnick couldn't stand it. Somewhere along the way, Jeff must have gotten sick of coming in 7th or 8th place, with his best performance of his career placing 5th. It must have just absolutely eaten at him, and he must have taken that anger out on random racers until he finally worked up the courage to take out one of the other pros. I bet he went to sleep dreaming about killing Marcus, but in order to kill him, he would actually have to be able to keep up with him, which would mean that he would actually have to be one of the best in the world. And he couldn't even keep up with Marcus in his dreams. See, we know that people lie, but data doesn't. When you put all the data together and it paints this picture, it is clear who it is pointing to. And at this point, all we needed was hard evidence, and that's where our new friend came in. So we were super excited to meet up with that officer in Boulder, and when we met up with him, we came with our laptops and we filled him in with our findings. He wasn't expecting it at all. He thought he was just going to show us around town that day, and we come like a couple wannabe detectives, like, look at these charts that we made overnight. We met at a random restaurant, and right when we started pulling it up, he was a little put off by it initially, but we pleaded and begged for him to just take a look at it for a minute and hear us out. And once he saw the charts and he saw the data and he saw the sources, he started to get a little bit compelled. The way we got him to look at it is just telling him that if you look at this for 5 minutes and you think it's nonsense, we will drop it and we'll just have a good time, but just hear us out for 5 minutes. But about 3 minutes into looking at the charts, he was sold. He was in on it. He wanted to hear all the information that we had gathered. And at that point, all of us were convinced it had to be Jeff. All of the data pointed towards that man. At this point, all we needed was evidence, and then we had to start planning to find some. Naturally, we offered him to take the laptop and all the data that we put together into the station to actually have a detective or some officer or some superior look into it. But when we said that, he just scoffed, and he just replied, I promise you guys, you two are the only ones looking into it, and if I bring it in, it's going to get tossed onto a pile and never looked at again. So we're just sitting there looking at him like nobody's gonna help, the police department's not gonna help. So we ask him, what could we possibly do about this? But he seemed interested in actually pursuing it with us, even if it was a little bit off the books. And he suggested that why don't we all just go to the next race that they're all scheduled to be at. And luckily, when we looked at the schedule events on that website, they were all scheduled to race that upcoming weekend. Thank God we booked this trip for 2 weeks, and this race was the second to last day that we were still gonna be in town. Apparently this past event that we did with them was their final warm-up event before this big event that they were all preparing for this upcoming week. But this event was a little bit different than the one that we competed with them. This event was called a last man standing race. And I know that's very fitting for the situation that we were in. Just to give you a quick breakdown of the rules of a last man standing race, this race was a 4.2 mile loop. Each racer has 1 hour to finish each loop. Then every hour on the hour, all of the racers start again if they finished within that hour time. Very quick example, just so you understand very clearly. If me and Jimmy started at the same time and it takes him 50 minutes to finish the loop, he gets a 10-minute break. If it takes me 55 minutes, I get a 5-minute break, and then we start again at the same time every hour on the hour. If you don't finish the loop within the hour time, you're eliminated. And the other way to be eliminated is just quit. Oh, and one more, if Jeff finds you taking a leak, also eliminated. I'm sorry, that was morbid. So we think the best way to approach this is for me and Jimmy to enter the race and for the officer to attend the race. Because realistically, all we would need to get this case off the ground is an eyewitness testimony that Jeff was acting fishy. But the main issue with this plan is glaringly obvious. us. How would me and Jimmy be able to keep up with these ultra marathon athletes in a last man standing competition to actually be on the track as something's happening? And you might not like this answer, but with what was at stake, we felt like it was morally right to do. We cheated, bro. We cheated hard. We cheated relentlessly. And this is another part of this reality, is that cheating was almost not enough because of just how hard this race was. Let me paint a picture for you. The trail was like an upside down U. If you're looking at the entrance to the race, the entrance is to the right and the exit is to the left, and it just goes straight for about 2 miles, it loops for like a half mile, and then it comes back to the exit 2 miles. It is an upside down U. There was also about 300 yards between the entrance and the exit. So our genius plan was to enter the race and keep a pace that kept us dead last until everybody was far enough ahead of us that we could take a sharp left turn into the woods, cross the 300-yard gap through the dense foliage, and wait at the other end until all the racers passed, and then we could hop out and finish that lap without exerting too much energy. It seemed like a good enough plan for all of us, so we just rested up that week and tried to prep as much as we could for this last man standing event. We just get there day of and we're feeling a little bit nervous. There's high stakes that day. Everybody has butterflies on a competition day. It's just natural. But this was different. We weren't just competing. We were cheating. Not to mention we were trying to catch a serial killer in the act. And I know what you're thinking, that we weren't actually competing. We're cheating, right? But that's where you're wrong, because the only race that we had ever done was that last one. And the running part of that last one was only like 6.2 miles. And in this one, even though we're not doing the full 4.2 mile loop, we're gonna have to run at least a half mile or a full mile until people get far enough away, where then we have to cross that 300 yards of foliage and then another half mile back. So each lap, we're doing 1, maybe 2 in a hard hike through dense woods. And after 6 laps, we're already running well more than we've ever done. And these last man standing races could get to 15, 20, sometimes 25 laps until everybody quits and one person wins. So we might not be doing as much as these professional athletes, but if Jeff doesn't act fast, we might be doing more running than we've ever done in our entire lives this day. And then worst case scenario happens. The race starts and we realize almost immediately that we are not going to be able to cheat the first lap. There were a good amount of people there that were just there for fun, and they were going very slow. So right off the bat, things aren't going according to plan. The first lap, right as our plan starts, we realize this lap we're going to have to run 4.2 immediately. And we barely got through the first lap on time within the hour, and we only had like 5 or 10 minutes until we had to start the next one. So a lot of people quit after the first lap. I wanted to quit, but we start the second one, and I guess people just wanted to do the second round, but they were walking right away, which means we couldn't wait for them to pass us and cross. So we had to run the second one as well. So we realize again, this might be a short day, but we might as well try to finish this second lap. So we couldn't cheat again, which means we already did 4.2. We're going to have to do 8.4 before we even have the possibility, the chance to cheat and stay here for longer. And we barely make this second lap. We had like 3 minutes and 30 seconds to spare. The day would have ended right there if the majority of the people at this race didn't quit in between those laps. So here we are ready to start this next lap. We've already run 8.4 miles and we think our plan is completely ruined. On top of that, we had to hide how exhausted we were, because if we were this exhausted after the second lap, people would get suspicious that we were able to keep going. So we're standing there just trying to keep our best poker faces as our bodies are filled with lactic acid and our lungs are on fire. And I swear to you, during those 2 laps, we both forgot why we were there. We were in pure survival mode. We weren't even keeping tabs on Jeff. We had no idea where he was. Jeff was the last thought in my mind as I was just trying to survive. And it hit me at the end of that second lap that I hadn't thought about Jeff for an hour, and he could have been hiding behind any tree waiting to strike. He could have taken us out within this past hour. And we're just in there like a couple sitting ducks, just dragging our feet trying to qualify for the next lap. But like I said, luckily a massive amount of people quit after lap 2. The only people left were the pros and a couple of excellent runners. So we actually had a chance to execute our plan, and there were no walking stragglers left ready to see us cheat. So we start the original plan. We run the first half mile very slow to make it seem like we're actually trying to compete, and maybe just slowing down for a quick breather as the rest of the pack drifted away. Then once we saw that the pack was far enough away, we just slipped into the tree line and started making our way across that 300-yard gap. And let me tell you, this trek through this 300-yard gap wasn't easy either, especially after what we had already done. Maybe if we were able to do it the first lap, it would have been okay. It wouldn't be so tedious and so horrific, but after an 8-mile run, now we're high-kneeing it over logs and sticks. It was just a disaster. But we got into a good flow because at least we weren't running the 4.2, and we got through it and we found some good trees that we could hide behind where we could also see a good stretch of trail so we could actually keep an eye on the competitors as they were passing. It was close enough for us to see down trail, but far enough back that the people that were on the trail couldn't really see us unless they were looking for us. And all of these guys are so locked in, they're not looking for people in the trees. So we would wait until the main pack passed us, and then we'd peek out to see if there were any quitters walking. Then we'd hop out and we'd still have to run that last half mile with a couple minutes to spare. And I'm gonna skip a bit of the story here because it was rather uneventful. We did that loop 19 times. So 8 miles to start, then 19 miles on top of that, with 19 300-yard hikes. And yes, there were large breaks in between where we were just hiding and catching our breaths, but we are not professional athletes. We were exhausted, we were dying, we didn't even know if we could keep going. And the long breaks almost made it worse because we kept letting our bodies get cold and achy before we had to run another half mile to the finish. But the reality was that we probably couldn't do another full lap, we wouldn't make it in time, and we'd be eliminated from the race. Or we would have been isolated, exhausted, and around a serial killer that had ultra marathon stamina. So at the point of the 19th lap, there were only 6 people left. Jeff Wilnick, me, Jimmy, 2 solid professionals that don't need to be named, and Marcus Cravens, aka Michael Jordan of running. And we're just staring at this pack of guys coming down from the stretch. We're hiding behind the trees and everybody's acting completely normal. And they were just running. They had a good pace going. They fly by us. So we hop out of the trees because we know that there's no stragglers, and we wanted a couple extra minutes to talk to the officer out in the event before we went back in. We hadn't had time to talk to the officer in between the last 5 laps, but we made eye contact with him and it didn't seem like he had anything to tell us, so it was all good. We just kept going back in. But this time we just wanted to have a little bit of dialogue because we were on the 19th lap. We didn't know how much longer we could do this. And we came out this time and he thought maybe this will be the one, but we're like, dude, we didn't see anything again. We were a little bit defeated, but as we were talking, the 2 racers that we didn't name volunteered to remove themselves from the race. They quit. They were happy with their performance and they were okay with being behind Marcus and Jeff. And now it was just me, Jimmy, Jeff, and Marcus left. So if Jeff was going to do something, this was going to be the time. We would be able to see both of them the whole time on the opening stretch. And if Jeff comes around the loop before Marcus, we'll know that something's wrong. And naturally, we're not going to go deep enough for him to do anything to us. And even though we were exhausted, we felt like the 2 of us could probably fight off somebody who had already run 80 miles that day. 2-on-1, we like our odds. Or another great scenario is that he's waiting for us at the loop and we never show up because we're cheating our asses off and he doesn't make it in time, so he gets eliminated from the race and nobody dies that day. So right before we go back into the race, the officer just says, if he doesn't do anything this lap, I think we call it a day. There's no point in isolating yourself with him over and over and giving him multiple chances. At this point, he might be getting paranoid and might be getting suspicious of you guys because you're no names and he might be looking at you closely. Plus, you guys look horrible. You guys don't look like you could do another, so if you come out on a good time, everybody's probably going to get suspicious. See, that was one thing that we weren't worried about. We felt like we looked as fatigued as the other athletes, even though we were only doing 1/4 of the work that they were doing. We didn't think that the general public was going to become suspicious because the other guys looked like crap too. So we get in there and we basically start walking right away as Marcus and Jeff jog away. And to be honest, part of me felt bad not letting Marcus know that he might be in danger. But part of me didn't feel like he was in danger. Marcus was the only one here that didn't look tired. And to be fair, Jeff was looking more fatigued than we were. From the looks of it, I don't think he'd be able to do anything to Marcus even if he tried. And if he tried, we'd either see it or know that he did something immediately. So they drift down the trail away from us and we do our thing. We hop right into the tree line and make our way across. We do what we do best. We cheat relentlessly and we just make our way through and wait on the other end. So we're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then we finally see them. Marcus is completely okay. Jeff didn't try anything, and both of them are just jogging right next to each other talking. And things are looking good. It seems as if Jeff is seriously struggling. So our guard goes down a little bit, and it actually looks like his shin splints are acting up again. Just by the way he's limping and grimacing, he didn't look 100%. And we just see Marcus talking in his ear, trying to motivate him, trying to get him to keep running. We could faintly hear that he's trying to get Jeff to finish this lap with him and just speak motivation into him. But Jeff is limping and tripping and damn near falling to his knees. And at that point, Marcus starts shouting at him to dig deep and believe in himself and like, this is what we're made for. This is how we separate ourselves. He's just trying to get Jeff to his feet to finish this lap with him. He has no idea what kind of man that he's talking to. Marcus just starts going, 1 more mile for the rest of your life. There's no weakness in you, Jeff. Don't let the coward win. There's no weakness. Get up, Jeff. Get up, Jeff. And then I see Jeff peek up at him in a very odd way. As Marcus is shouting louder and louder, it looks as if Jeff is playing possum. It looks as if this is how he does it. This is how he sets the trap. He's pretending to be hurt to catch Marcus off guard. He's doing the Ted Bundy. We think he's about to strike at any second, and Marcus is picking him up, makes him put his hands on his head, and Jeff just has his hands on his head with his eyes closed, acting hurt and exhausted, and we know at any second he's gonna try something, and we're gonna be right there. And I see Jeff opening his eyes a little bit, fluttering his eyes open, looking behind Marcus, looking back down the path behind him, seeing if anybody's around, before closing his eyes and looking up and taking a deep breath as if he's making that decision to strike. And I'm just standing there and my entire body is flexed with tension because I know it's about to happen. And Marcus is almost screaming at Jeff at this point because the time is running out, and he's just pleading with Jeff to continue to finish what he started, to not live with regret, just to get after it. But Marcus's tone is changing. He just seems so disappointed in Jeff, like a parent disappointed in a child, and he just sounds disgusted with him. And Jeff's eyes are still closed. I know it's burning inside Jeff, hearing Marcus trying to speak positivity into him when Marcus is the man that Jeff could never be. And Marcus just yells at him, just take one more step. And then Jeff basically whimpers, I can't, completely defeated. And that next second felt like 10 minutes. And Marcus's eyes changed, and he gripped the custom tube attached to his water pack, the tube that was attached to his hand with metal loops around each finger. And I realized at that moment it made a set of makeshift brass knuckles. And Marcus lunges forward with his left leg and throws an overhand right directly at Jeff's temple, who's barely standing. His knees aren't even under him, and his eyes are closed, and he's looking up at the sky completely defenseless. And at the last millisecond, Jimmy and I blurt out a random loud warning, prompting Jeff to open his eyes and flinch just enough to avoid Marcus's kill shot. So this missile of an overhand right lined with brass knuckles only turned into a grazing blow off of his forehead instead of going straight through his temple. It still connected and it dropped Jeff to his back, but it didn't connect like Marcus intended it to. Marcus intended for that to be a kill shot. He tried to kill Jeff just like he killed George the week prior. It was Marcus Cravens. He was the killer. The Michael Jordan of endurance sports was taking people out. But so much is going through our head. How could he possibly have time to kill people in each race and still have time to win? This man hasn't lost a race in 5 years. This man disguised lethal brass knuckles as a hydration tool, and he didn't even have to hide them. And people don't even know how lethal brass knuckles are. Brass knuckles are often illegal, not because they're so lethal. They're illegal because people don't realize how lethal they are, and they're more likely to use them, and they don't even think that they're using deadly force. Hitting somebody that isn't expecting it with brass knuckles, especially if you're bigger than them and know how to throw a punch, is just as bad as swinging a bat as hard as you can at someone's head. So Jeff is on the floor tending to the knob on his forehead and his shin splints. He could barely get up, and Marcus whips his head towards us, and we're stumbling out of the tree line ready to confront him, not expecting it to be him. We were expecting to be saving him. And once we were out on that trail, it did not feel safe. Marcus Cravens was an absolute juiced up unit, and he had brass knuckles on both hands. If it turned into a fight, it was 3-on-1. But let me tell you, it was still a toss-up. And I could see in Marcus's eyes that he was deciding to either fight or run. And luckily, this man chose to take off running towards the exit. And he started to run fast, even after doing an 80-mile race that day. This man was running as if he didn't just win a last man standing race. Because let's make it clear, Jeff was not making it, and we cheated. And we start tending to Jeff, we're just relieved that this guy's gone. But we realized that nobody else at the event knows that it's him. We're the only people that know that Marcus Cravens is a crazed serial serial killer. So we have to get back to let the officer know that it's Marcus. We know that the officer has no assumption that it's Marcus. He won't think anything of it when Marcus comes out of that exit. He'll just be worried about us thinking that we're stuck in this loop with Jeff, the suspected killer, because he thinks that it's Jeff just like we did. So we have to pick Jeff up and carry him to the finish line, which was almost a mile away. So we just hoist Jeff up, throw one of his arms over each of us, and we start trying to run back. But by the time we're closing in on the exit, we are absolutely exhausted. And we're closing in on this exit with just a little bit of time on the hour. So we're getting close to this finish line, and there's people at the exit cheering us on, seeing us carry Jeff, thinking that this is a beautiful sportsmanship moment, and we might make it to get to the next round, and we stayed back for somebody who couldn't make it. Everybody there thinks this is a heartwarming moment when we're completely exhausted, cheaters that did not make the time, and there's a serial killer somewhere behind them at a random tent. The reality is that this is a serial killer moment. This is an attempted murder moment. This is a tragedy, and they're just cheering us on as we're trying to yell over their cheers, pleading for them to listen to us, but they can't even hear us, and we can't project our voices hard enough because of our exhaustion. So we're just on the floor tending to Jeff, trying to get help for Jeff and let somebody know to get the officer so we could tell him who it actually is. So we're just exhaustedly pleading, desperately pleading that Marcus is the killer. Marcus is doing these murders, but nobody has any context other than the officer, so they're just looking at us completely confused, not understanding the accusation that we're putting out. And once the cop finally gets through the crowd to talk to us, he's concerned about us. He thought it was Jeff. He thinks that Jeff might have attacked us and we took him out, and like, look, we still need to frame him for these murders. Like, look, we got him, he attacked us. But he has no idea that it's actually Marcus and Jeff is a victim here. So we have to explain it to him when we could barely breathe. So once we get through to the officer that it is not Jeff, the data was wrong. It has been Marcus this entire time. He helps us to our feet, and we rush over to Marcus's tent and start questioning the people around his base camp if they've seen Marcus. And all the people are super confused because they think that he just won, and we're asking where he is in an angry tone as if he did something wrong. But Marcus is these people's heroes, and they're just like, he was here just packing up his fanny pack with easy carb waffles, pounding this simple carb gels and filling up his pouch with electrolyte water. It seemed like as if he might do one more lap, like he wanted to run, but he took off in that direction, which they didn't find weird because Marcus is known to always go that extra mile to just impress people around him. The last man standing competition wasn't enough for him. He needed a little bit more effort. So they just thought it was another iconic Marcus Cravens moment. They said that he took off running into the national park northwest of the event, and apparently all he said was, "I won, they can't finish, but I'm not finished," before he just took off running. This man was a walking Instagram motivational quote. And there were other police officers at this event, so the officer that was with us got our quick testimony, and we were like, dude, he threw a absolute kill shot at Jeff. It is him. He tried to hurt him. We need to find this guy. So the officer goes to his buddies that are working the event and lets them know that we need to track down Marcus for aggravated assault and attempted murder. So it took a little bit for the officers to organize how they were going to go about going after this guy who just took off into a national park. But luckily there were some ATVs around, there were some off-roading vehicles, and they had a couple dogs, so they were able to track his scent and follow him until they hit just this pretty big massive lake that had two cliffs on each side. So if you wanted to keep going, you would have to cross the lake. And by the time the police officers got there, wouldn't you know it, Marcus Cravens was already about finished crossing the lake on a swim. So their only option was to radio police on the other side to try to organize some type of cutoff to catch this guy, because they had no vehicles to get over the water. They're just watching this guy finish his swim and take off running further and further away from justice. They even called in a helicopter to track him because there was no scenario where they were going to find him if they waited any longer. It was apparent that he was attempting to run across state lines into Wyoming, and he wouldn't stop running until he got there, theoretically to run outside of their jurisdiction. So we weren't on this chase. We don't have the authority to chase him or get into a helicopter, so this is what we heard after the fact. Marcus Cravens was fleeing the police for over 8 hours, and this man covered over 50 miles through rough terrain until they finally cornered him. And even at that point, he still wouldn't give up. He was still fighting back, trying to fight off these police officers to the point where they had to tase him and restrain him. And he did that after running 18 4.2 mile laps, which, let's do some quick maths, is 75 miles. So 75, so a total of 120 miles plus a swim across a wild ice cold lake, and he still was fighting back when they got to him. So once they had him in custody, they were confused why he was trying so hard to flee, because they only had our small testimony where he hit somebody, just an aggravated assault. But apparently Marcus thought that they were onto him. He must have thought that the police had much more information on him than they did. They didn't have anything but our eyewitness testimony of him trying to hit Jeff and the data that they hadn't even seen yet that we put together. So when they started questioning him, he refused to speak, but opened it up with, "I'll tell you everything as long as I get a gym and a treadmill in prison." And at that point, they're like, "Why are you assuming you're going to prison? There is something going on here." And once the officer that we spoke to let them know, "We think this dude was killing a lot of people," him saying that plus our testimony made them kind of sit back and just say, "You could have whatever you want in prison. Go ahead and tell us what happened." And then Marcus Cravens proceeded to admit to every single murder that we had on that chart. So the full story of Marcus Cravens is that he used to be obese and he started running because he hated himself so much, just to quiet his mind. He had to torture himself through physical pain just to cope with his self-hatred. And when running wasn't enough, he went to swimming. And when swimming wasn't enough, he went to biking. When biking wasn't enough, he put all three together. Then he went on to Ironman races, then ultramarathon races, then last man standing races. And when all of that wasn't enough, he had to add an extra element to it. Nobody was able to beat him, not even close. He just kept winning over and over. He had no quit left in him, so he had nothing left to hate. But he started noticing quit in other people, and he started to resent them, and that resentment started to grow. He hated that they would come to the competitions that he would come to and that they would break. He hated how weak-minded these people were in his eyes. At this point, winning wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to kill somebody's inner weakness, somebody's inner coward. So he started killing people that he thought were quitters mid-race. He would give up leads, wait around for somebody that he felt was a quitter, that he deemed to be a quitter or a coward, and he would kill them and then go on to finish the race just to challenge himself. And he hadn't lost in 5 years. And then once he did it the first time, he couldn't stop. It was part of the competition to him. It was part of his routine. When he would go out to compete, he had to up the stakes every time. So these weren't just races for him anymore. These were a hunt. He had to kill somebody's inner coward. He started by drowning people. He'd wait around buoys, wait under the water holding his breath and just hold them under until they drowned, and he would come up, beat everybody back, and win the race. When that wasn't enough, he started taking people out during the cycling portion. When they'd get close to a dangerous turn where there was a railing or a long fall, he'd pin them up against the railing, wouldn't let them turn sharply, and kick them off the cliff. And when that wasn't enough, he turned to striking people with his makeshift brass knuckles during the running portion. And this is very interesting. When they asked him why he didn't kill anybody the day that Jeff Wilnick didn't compete, he said that George Davidson came there that day to compete with him. He came that day to beat him. George almost did. That was the photo finish that we read about. He said that George wasn't scared of him. He said that George killed his own inner coward that day and gave him a real run for his money. He was preoccupied. He didn't have to kill. He was racing against an equal. So he was fulfilled, and he loved George for that. That's why the pictures from that event they were embracing, he looked like he loved George, like he loved the competition that George brought to the table. So obviously the follow-up question is, why would you kill him? And Marcus replied, because he became scared of me. He lost the fire. I saw it in his eyes. He was broken after the last time we raced, and he became weak over one loss. When they asked him how many people he killed, he said it was 27, and they only had a number for 26. So they asked him, who is that extra person that we don't have accounted for? And this man said, I killed the coward inside of myself before I killed all those cowards. Well, that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that story of Marcus Cravens. I hope you choose to subscribe and like the video. And of course, I hope you decide to buy a piece of Skinwalker Ranch merch from us. It would mean the world. It's only going to be available through the month of August. If you enjoy my videos, please surprise me with that level of support. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. And if you enjoyed this story, YouTube thinks that you would enjoy this one as well. Maybe just as much, maybe a little bit more.